Judge Hannah Dugan didn't just interfere. With a federal arrest, she rerouted the agents, disrupted the timing, and gave a violent illegal immigrant a chance to slip out the back door, all while cloaked in judicial authority. And that's not an opinion, that's the title of the evidence file that landed on Pam Bondi's desk just after midnight. It wasn't a phone call, it wasn't a meeting, it was a knock. Sharp, deliberate, on the glass door of Bondi's office. She was the last one left in the building, seated under a single lamp, her blazer slung over the chair and her legal pad half full of unrelated notes. A man in a dark DOJ badge slipped in, said nothing, and slid a thick envelope onto her desk, red tape stamped. Eyes only. She didn't ask questions, she just peeled it open. The first thing she saw wasn't words, it was an image, still frame, grainy but unmistakable. Judge Hannah Dugan, black robe, stern posture, left hand extended in a firm point, aimed straight at two seated ICE agents in the hallway of the Milwaukee County Courthouse. Bondi blinked. The next image, a different angle. Eduardo Flores Ruiz, an illegal immigrant previously deported in 2013, now charged with 3 counts of domestic battery, walking calmly down the corridor, a defense attorney beside him. Behind them, nothing, no agents, no security, just a quiet door propped open. In the distance, another page, a surveillance frame from the street. Ruiz running ICE, chasing traffic, skidding, and then pause. A handwritten note on yellow legal paper. Subject: Judge Hannah Dugan. Obstruction concern, see timeline. Bondi leaned forward. She flipped through the rest line by line. Call logs, security timestamps, affidavit excerpts, video transcriptions. She stopped at a page labeled exit sequence. It diagrammed how Dugan had exited her courtroom. Mid-hearing, approached the agents, pointed them toward the chief judge's office, then returned to escort the defendant and his lawyer into her private chambers. Minutes later, they appeared again on a basement camera, headed toward a door marked staff only. There was no courtroom emergency, no riot, no disturbance, just a quiet decision hidden behind institutional rituals, and a man with a violent record stepping out while federal agents were misdirected upstairs. Pam Bondi didn't need to read the rest. She reached for her pen, drew a long red stroke across the cover page, and wrote just 2 words: request hearing. That was 3:04 a.m. By 7:50, the file was in Senator John Kennedy's hands. He didn't call a press conference, he didn't tweet, he opened it, read it alone, and let the weight settle. He signed it at 8:15. The order was short and direct: emergency oversight hearing, 3 days. That's how it started, not with a bang, but with a black robe, a hallway, and a question no judge ever once asked under oath: did you help him escape? It didn't take long for the defenders of judicial sabotage to dust off their talking points, polish their podiums, and line up behind a microphone. Less than 24 hours after Senator Kennedy signed off on the emergency hearing, the left did what the left does best: hold a press conference where logic goes to die and deflection gets a standing ovation. First up, a DNC spokesperson whose job description might as well be professional reality contortionist stepped forward and announced with all the moral certainty of a Twitter blue check mark: judges are not law enforcement, they have no obligation to assist. I see. Yes, the new standard: if the law makes you uncomfortable, just pretend it's someone else's job. A remarkable take, considering Judge Dugan didn't just not assist, she allegedly reprogrammed the entire building like a human GPS unit, pointing federal agents away from their target and conveniently escorting said target toward a government-issued exit sign. But it didn't stop there. Another Democratic lawmaker, eyes wide with outrage and irony, deficiency, declared, "We will not allow a federal overreach to set a dangerous precedent for state judicial independence." A noble sentiment, if only it were tethered to something resembling facts. Because here's the dirty secret they don't say out loud: obstruction of a federal arrest isn't judicial discretion. It's obstruction you don't get to swap the Constitution for Yelp reviews of immigration policy and call it independence. And then came the cherry on top: a formal request to delay the hearing. Why? Political risk, they said. Lack of procedural fairness, they added. Because apparently when a judge is accused of aiding a suspect's escape, the real tragedy is how fast Congress noticed. To his credit, Kennedy didn't flinch. He read the request, chuckled once, and issued a single-line rejection. The federal process was obstructed. The hearing stands, but the performance wasn't over that night. America was treated to an exclusive CNN appearance, featuring the defense attorney herself, polished, poised, and professionally offended with all the faux gravitas of a made-for-TV Senate drama. She leaned in and told the nation Judge Dugan was simply preserving the integrity of her courtroom. She did nothing wrong, of course, because when ICE shows up with a lawful warrant, the integrity response is to yell, point them elsewhere, and sneak your defendant through the back door. Like it's a magic trick. Pam Bondi watched the whole interview from her office. She didn't say a word, not until the segment ended and her aide asked what she thought. She looked up from her notes, smirked just slightly, and said, "They want to play big. Fine, I'll play louder." And just like that, the hearing wasn't just procedural, it was personal. Tomorrow the doors open, and this time Judge Dugan's robe won't be enough to hide behind. The lights were already on before the sun came up, not the kind that flicker in old chandeliers, but the cold, deliberate glow of broadcast rigs and federal surveillance. Capitol security had doubled, maybe tripled. Every hallway buzzed, not with protesters, but with expectation. This wasn't a routine oversight hearing. This was a loaded chamber waiting for detonation by 9 o'clock a.m. The marble floors of the Senate hearing room echoed under the weight of polished shoes and unspoken agendas. At the center, a man with a pen and a gavel. Senator John Kennedy took his seat. His expression said less than usual, which was saying a lot. With one firm tap, the room fell into alignment. This hearing, he declared, voice even but heavy, will examine whether a state judge deliberately obstructed federal enforcement of immigration law. Let the record show we proceed without delay. Every seat was filled except one on the right, a full panel from the Department of Justice, a lead ICE officer in crisp civilian attire, in Pam Bondi, calm, resolute, and holding the folder that had started it all. On the left, the defense table, legal counsel for the accused, 2 Democratic aides in dark suits, and the most conspicuous absence of the morning, an empty chair labeled on your Hannah. Dugan's silence hung for just a moment too long. Then Kennedy leaned forward. The core question today, he said slowly, is not about what happened in a hallway. It's about whether the robe makes the rules. Bondi didn't wait for an invitation. She rose, deliberate but steady, and approached the microphone. No notes, no teleprompter, just a folder in one hand and in the other a courtroom's worth of restraint. Let me be clear, she said. This isn't a witch hunt. This is a search for the moment truth got misfiled under procedure. A few heads turned, the rest stayed frozen. I'm not here to accuse without cause, she continued. I'm here to ask, has the judiciary, in defending its authority, forgotten its boundaries? Because we don't just have allegations, we have timestamps, we have surveillance. And yes, she held the freeze frame. This wasn't a judge reacting, Bondi said. This was a judge initiating. Then came the paperwork. She dropped a new exhibit onto the desk like it was a checkmate, because it was a memo from the chief court administrator. Jury access doors may not be opened or used during proceedings without express instruction from the presiding judges. Chambers. Bondi gave the room just enough time to read that sentence in silence before closing the folder with a single tap. So to be clear, she said, the only person who could have green-lit that exit was the person currently hiding behind judicial immunity. The air in the chamber had changed. No murmurs, no interruptions, just a slow creeping realization that the robe may not cover what it used to. Bondi stepped back, but not before delivering the kind of line that doesn't fade with the next news cycle. Immunity, she said, was never meant to be a shield for smuggling. It's there to protect the bench, not to build an escape route under it. No one clapped, but no one looked away either, because in a room built for deliberation, the time for pretending this was a misunderstanding had officially run out. It started, as many collapses do, with an email. No shouting, no reveal music, just a one-line internal note DOJ projected onto the screen like a surgeon holding up a scalpel. Agents redirected per judicial instruction. Courthouse security admin. April 18, 11:04 a.m. No ambiguity, no missing context, just a simple sentence that hit harder than a dozen accusations. Pam Bondi didn't blink. She didn't need to elaborate. The words were doing just fine on their own. Then came the second exhibit, a timeline pulled from courthouse surveillance logs. Nothing fancy, no opinions, just two synchronized columns. Left side, 10:35 a.m. ICE agents leave hallway. Right side, 10:35 a.m. Judge Dugan escorts defendant into private chambers. There it was, 2 clocks 1. Conclusion. Bondi didn't point. She let the DOJ rep handle the technicals, but her silence wasn't absence, it was strategy. She was letting the facts vacuum the air out of the room. Then came the nail. A leaked memo quietly entered into the record. Judge Dugan requested agents stationed in the West Corridor be directed to the Chief Judge's Office, Internal Comms, Court Admin Division. Not informed, not coordinated, requested as in initiated. The camera panned briefly to the defense table. The attorneys, so eloquent hours earlier, sat still, eyes locked forward. The kind of stillness that didn't say, "We're thinking," but rather, "We've run out of rope." Senator Kennedy didn't ask for comment. He didn't have to. Pam Bondi broke the silence instead. "Let me ask plainly," she said, voice low, deliberate. "Was any of this shared with ICE before it happened?" The defense counsel opened her mouth and closed it again. 3 seconds, maybe 4, enough time for the walls to shift. Bondi turned to the room, not with triumph, but with the finality of someone who'd stopped chasing admissions. She already had the timestamps. Now she had the timeline. "We don't need a signed confession," she said. "We need a watch." There was no outburst, no calls for recess, just a quiet rearranging of postures, a subtle panic sinking in among the rows behind the defense, because in a courtroom built on procedure, nothing's louder than precision, and the clock it just indicted the robe. The evidence was done speaking. The timestamps had done their damage, but sometimes the most damning testimony doesn't come from a document, it comes from the people. Paper trails never bother to follow. She sat near the back, no press cameras turned her way, no Chiron flashed her name across the screen, just a woman in a plain jacket, hair tucked behind one ear, eyes that looked like they'd waited too long for too little. Senator Kennedy glanced down at a note, then gave her a quiet nod. "You may speak. 2 minutes." She didn't rush, she didn't dramatize, but her voice, quiet, steady, somehow cracked louder than anything that came before. "I came to court that day because I believed it mattered," she began. "I believed the system would hold, that the man who broke my jaw in front of my kids would have to sit there and hear a verdict, but instead he disappeared, walked out like he was late for a lunch meeting, and the people responsible, they walked out too with him. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Even the stenographer seemed to pause. There were no rebuttals, no clever constitutional shields, just a silence so uncomfortable it bordered on confession. And that's the thing about Justice, it isn't just about rules, it's about recognition, about whether the system remembers who it was built for. In the first place, Pam Bondi didn't speak. She didn't need to. Instead, she rose, slowly walked to the front and placed a thick binder on the table. The cover, visible even from the back row, bore 7 stark words: People of the United States versus obstruction by judiciary. It wasn't a flourish, it was an accusation with a spine somewhere in the back. A staffer fumbled to redirect a camera, but the lens wasn't fast enough to capture what was now unraveling in the room. A shift in gravity. This wasn't about politics anymore. This was about the unspoken cost of treating black robes like bulletproof vests. And then came the question, so simple it felt radioactive: if the judge stands with the defendant, who stands with the rest of us? No one answered, not because they didn't know, but because they finally did. And as the chamber braced for the final reckoning, only one piece remained. Who would dare call this justice? Late afternoon light filtered into the hearing room, casting soft streaks across rows no longer full. The walls didn't echo with applause or outrage, just the quiet hum of a room finally letting go of the noise. Letitia James closed her folder with the kind of delicacy usually reserved for folding a losing hand. No words, no glances. She slid the papers into her briefcase like they were yesterday's weather report. Not even the press dared trail her out. The last of the Democratic senators stood, murmured to no one in particular, and exited without fanfare. No statements to cameras, no righteous indignation packaged for prime time. Sam Anter walked behind them, unbothered by victory or loss. Whatever wind had once carried his cause had long since stilled. He didn't look back. And then there was Bondi, still seated, still steady. The binder in front of her bore a title not meant for headlines but for history: DOJ Civil Criminal Review. Priority flagged Senator Kennedy, who had presided with the kind of neutrality that only comes from seeing too much for too long, leaned toward her slightly and asked almost as a courtesy, "Would you like to deliver a concluding statement?" She didn't turn, didn't blink. No need, Bondi said, her gaze resting on the now empty upper gallery. They heard enough. There was no gavel slam, no dramatic walk-off, only the slow fade of studio lights and the final blink of a red recording bulb. No hashtags trended, no networks cut to commercial with bombshell banners, just silence, the kind that doesn't beg to be noticed but demands to be remembered. And as the screen dimmed, one final line appeared across the cover of that binder, silent, sharp, and utterly unmissable: Federal Accountability Index updated. Because sometimes justice doesn't need to scream, it just needs to